Hi guys, welcome back to Mer Murder, where we put the Mer in murder. I'm your host, Mercedes Rose, and I am so excited. I am so excited to be back, you guys. I'm so sorry I was gone for so long. I've had some really great big changes in my life, so I think I just needed time to take a step away, get my life together, figure it out. I'm adulting, but there's always one thing missing, and it was you guys. It was the pod, and I just felt so like, oh, I couldn't wait to come back. So now that I'm back and I'm better, and I'm so excited. I want to thank you guys so much. Everyone that did check on me and ask me where anything was, like just being like, hello, when are we getting another episode? Like, where have you been? It's been, how long? December? January, February, March, April, May. It's been 5 months, guys. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Well, actually, when this goes up, it'll be June, so it'll feel a little bit longer than that. I'm so sorry. Okay, I'm so sorry. But thank you guys so much for the support, regardless, whether I was posting or not. If you knew what was going on in my personal life, thank you for the support. Thank you for always pushing me to be my best self. Thank you for always wishing the best for me, making sure that I'm always good, and just always holding me accountable, and just making sure that I stick to what I say and what I say I want to do, and always achieve all my goals and my dreams, because without you guys I would not be here. But yeah, guys, I'm back and I'm better, and I cannot wait to get back to the pod. I really have been missing you guys and the show so much. So without further ado, let's get into this week's episode. One of the most common sayings for as long as I've been alive, and even longer, has always been, money is the root of all evil. And as avid true crime listeners, that is proved to be true time and time again. In today's case, we will see just how evil one person can really get when it comes down to possible financial gain or the lack thereof. Our case today takes place in Yuma, Arizona, a decent-sized city that stretches along the Colorado River. Famous for its prominent Hispanic culture, small-town feel, and hot spots for retirees to visit during the wintertime, the city earned its slogan as the sunniest city on earth. But unfortunately for one family and their loved ones, the sun would be taken away from them on the night of June 24th, 2005. The Yuma Police Department was dispatched to the residence at 2037 Mesa Street after there were reports of gunshots in the home, followed by screams for help. Once police arrived at the scene at approximately 8:25 p.m., they came across the first victim of the shooting, 35-year-old Luis Rios. Luis was laid out in the backyard with a trail of blood following him, his hands tied behind his back, and his body was riddled with bullets, but he was still alive. He was rushed to the Yuma Regional Medical Center, but unfortunately he passed from his gunshot wounds to his chest and head while en route. He was pronounced dead on arrival. The other officers still at the scene were wary of the situation that may be going on in the home. They were made aware that Luis shared the home with his girlfriend and her 4 children, so they decided to treat it as a possible hostage situation. But as time passed with little to no response or action in the home, one of the officers slowly made his way inside. As he entered through the side door, almost immediately he discovered the bodies of 13-year-old Andreas Crawford and 12-year-old Enrique Bedoya. As more officers entered and searched the home, they found 3 more bodies: 29-year-old Adrian Heredia, Luis's girlfriend, 9-year-old Inez Newman, and 6-year-old Danny Heredia III. It was revealed that all victims in the home were bound with electrical wires and brutally asphyxiated. However, the youngest child, Danny Heredia III, was found to have died from multiple gunshot wounds. Left with the deadliest mass murder in the city's history, no survivors, and very little eyewitness testimony, investigators and officers were left to try to find the person behind it, but it proved to be more and more difficult as time went on. The only evidence they had at the scene were fingerprints left on the bags used to suffocate the victims and DNA found on the nightstand in one of the bedrooms. The DNA found on the nightstand also matched the DNA found on the steering wheel of Luis's Dodge Durango, which was found parked and abandoned near Sanguinetti Park, a park that was about a 6-minute drive down the street from the family's home. It appeared to authorities that the vehicle was used as a possible getaway car to flee from the scene, but despite the DNA evidence, investigators still found themselves with little to no leads. At first, they suspected Luis's ex-wife, Becky. However, despite the two being split up, Luis still took care of Becky and even took care of some of her bills. So she had basically no motive to kill Luis or his new family. Then investigators turned their attention to 39-year-old Preston Strong, Luis's best friend. Preston often hung around the liquor store that Luis and Adrian worked at, And more times than anyone could count, Luis loaned Preston money whenever he needed it, forming a strong but codependent bond between the two, at least on Preston's end. It was widely known by those involved that the liquor store had a .38 caliber gun, in case of emergencies. And police later discovered that not only was that gun missing, but the ammunition designated for it was the same ammunition found in the bodies of two of the victims that suffered gunshot wounds, Luis and Danny. But just as quick as officers began to suspect Preston as their perp, that suspicion fell for a couple of reasons. One of the neighbors who spoke with police that night of the murders gave an eyewitness account of a man who was fleeing the scene. She said she saw a light-skinned Hispanic man fleeing the scene of the crime. However, Preston is a darker-skinned black man. Authorities also spoke with Preston's girlfriend at the time, and she confirmed with them that Preston was with her the night of the murders. Now, investigators kept Preston on their radar after forensic testing showed that Preston's fingerprints were found all throughout the house. Not only did they match the prints in the home, but they also matched the DNA found on Luis's steering wheel. However, these findings wouldn't prove to be as concrete as investigators had hoped because Preston was Luis's best friend, and it was very common for him to be in places throughout the family's home and in Luis's vehicle, so of course his fingerprints would be all over the scene. And unfortunately, the investigators were back to square one. Months turned into years, and thousands of calls and anonymous tips were phoned into the police. Investigators conducted over 1,300 interviews regarding the murders of Adrian, Luis, Andreas, Enrique, Inez, and Danny. The murders would later be popularly known as the Mesa Street murders. But as time went on, the case grew more and more cold. But devastation wasn't over just yet for the people of Yuma, Arizona, because only 2 years later, another innocent life would be taken away, and the similarities between the two incidents would become undeniable. Dr. Satinder Gill was a 62-year-old physician originally from New Delhi, India. Satinder immigrated to the United States in 1970 with his wife at the time, Daljit Kaur. The couple went on to have 2 children before splitting up. After immigrating to the U.S., Satinder completed his education in medicine and practiced at the Martinsburg Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Martinsburg, West Virginia. It was at this hospital where he spent 28 years as the chief of nuclear medicine and radiology services before retiring and settling down in Yuma, Arizona. In the afternoon hours of November 1st, 2007, Satinder called a friend over to his house and offered her $100 in cash to run an errand for him. He requested that she come to his house and retrieve a check for $24,000 that he placed underneath his doormat. He asked her to go to the bank and cash in that check for $24,000 in cash. Slightly confused and concerned, Satinder's friend asked for just a little more detail, but he quickly responded and said that it was, quote, a family emergency. So Satinder's friend arrived to the house and did what she was asked. She retrieved the check, cashed it at the bank, and received the money in huge wads of $50 bills wrapped in purple money bands. The friend returned to Satinder's house to deliver the money to him and was expecting a warm welcome. However, she was met with a slightly cracked door and a nervous-seeming Satinder peeking his head through. She was not allowed inside the home, but Satinder thanked his friend for retrieving the money for him before he took it inside. He also offered to take her out to dinner later that evening. Well, the evening came and went, and with no sign of Satinder and numerous unanswered calls, his friend went home but couldn't shake the awful feeling that something happened to her friend. This feeling grew increasingly worse when the following day, on November 2nd, the woman received a phone call from Satinder's phone, but when she answered the call, a complete stranger was on the other end. The man on the line said that he found the abandoned phone in a canal, and Satinder's friend immediately hung up the phone and called the police to do a welfare check at Satinder's home. That evening, after numerous attempts at getting a response from someone in the home, firefighters broke in and were subject to an extremely gruesome scene. The house was filled with the odor of gas, and candles were lit all around the home. Satinder was found slumped over head first into a bathtub filled with water, and he had 2 belts tightly wrapped around his neck. Autopsy findings later concluded that 62-year-old Dr. Gill was killed approximately 24 hours prior to his body being found. His cause of death was ruled asphyxiation due to ligature strangulation and blunt force trauma to the head. He also suffered multiple broken bones. Investigators had no clue where to start with this investigation. Dr. Gill had no enemies, no recent issues with neighbors, friends, loved ones. It seemed like this attack was completely random. But as they released pieces of information about the case to the public, one tip would blow not only the Gill murder case wide open, but also the case of the Mesa Street murders from 2 years prior. The girlfriend of now 42-year-old Preston Strong called the police with a tip. Yes, the same Preston Strong from earlier in the case who was considered a prime suspect in the Mesa Street murder investigation. Preston's girlfriend just so happened to work at the same medical office that Dr. Gill worked at. Although he was retired, Satinder decided to go back and offer his services at the Desert Heart and Vascular Center in Yuma. The woman found it alarming that Dr. Gill went missing and then turned up murdered on the exact day that Preston randomly came across this newfound wealth, giving her $9,500 that he couldn't account for. She knew Preston had been struggling for a while as she had to foot all of the couple's bills with her income alone, and she found it extremely odd that Preston had somehow gotten almost $10,000 in cash overnight. She was also aware that Preston was at risk of being sent to prison fairly soon if he did not pay a large amount of restitution money in which he owed for a separate criminal matter. So investigators took this tip and they ran with it. They viewed surveillance footage from a local Walmart on November 1st, the day of Satinder's murder. The footage depicted Preston trying to use the cash to purchase a money order worth $4,300. After requesting the money order to the cashier, she explained to Preston that in order to place a money order of such a large amount, Preston would need ID, which he did not have on him, so he opted to take out 4 separate money orders in smaller amounts so that he wouldn't need to use his ID for them. On the same day that Satinder's body was found on November 2nd, 2007, Preston Strong was arrested and taken into custody on an unrelated charge for fraud. After further investigation into both the Gill murder case and the Mesa Street murders, authorities formally announced on November 28, 2007, that Preston Strong was the main suspect in both homicide cases. In April of 2008, Preston was indicted for the murder of Dr. Satinder Gill, but it wasn't until 2012 where he was taken to trial and inevitably found guilty of the crime. That same year, Strong was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole for the murder of Dr. Gill, and was also sentenced an additional 25.5 years on top of his life sentence. 5 years for the armed robbery, 5 for burglary in the first degree, 5 for aggravated assault, 3.5 for kidnapping, and a total of 7 years for the attempted arson with a person inside. But justice was not finished with Preston Strong just yet. Given Strong's violent actions in the Gill case, investigators couldn't help but revisit the Mesa Street murders. They did some further digging into why Strong became the detective's main suspect in the first place all those years ago. They would go on to learn that Preston was pretty much a freeloader, and over the course of his and Luis's friendship, Luis had lent him thousands of dollars over the years, but eventually enough became enough. Luis had a family to take care of, and Preston was getting in the way of that. Not only because he was draining Luis of his income, but because he spent so much time at their home. Luis could barely get any alone time with his girlfriend or his new family. Just a month before the murders, Luis's cousin, Soto Rios, overheard an argument between Preston and his cousin Luis. Luis later told Soto that the reason they got into the argument was because Luis refused to lend Preston any more money, and that Preston was officially cut off financially. The day of the murders was supposed to be a day like any other. June 24, 2005 was a Friday, so the children's mother, Adrienne, was expecting a visit from Danny III and Inez's father pretty soon. Per their agreement, Danny Heredia Jr. would be able to take his children, Danny and Inez, every Thursday and Friday, returning the kids back Friday evening or Friday night. For the sake of easier storytelling, I'll call Danny the son, little Danny, and then I'll call Danny the father, just Danny. So Danny, the children's father, tried calling Adrienne multiple times to coordinate the drop-off scheduled for 6 p.m. However, she remained unresponsive the entire time. Regardless, to follow the rules of their agreement, Danny still arrived at the house at Mesa Street at around 5:30 p.m. Adrienne's PT Cruiser sat outside of the home in the driveway, so Danny was almost certain that she was home. But as the father of the children knocked on the door and sat outside the residence waiting for a response for what felt like forever, Danny decided to just return back to his truck with his children and make his way back to his apartment. As they drove off, Luis was actually entering the neighborhood. And as the two men crossed each other, Danny not only recognized Luis's Dodge Durango, but also the man driving it. So he turned his vehicle around and began trailing Luis back to his house. The two men greeted one another and discovered that neither of them could actually reach Adrienne, even after the pair tried calling her multiple times while standing outside of the home. Danny decided that he would just leave his children with Luis and left a message for Adrienne letting her know that he did so. And the two men parted ways as Luis entered the residence with 9-year-old Inez and 6-year-old little Danny. Shortly after Danny, the father, arrived at his apartment, he received a phone call from Adrienne. However, it was Luis on the other end of the line. This was extremely odd to Danny, as the men rarely spoke on the phone with one another, especially not through Adrienne's phone. But Luis was on the other end telling Danny that Adrian was, quote, tripping. About what? Danny wasn't sure, but he assumed the couple was just having an argument and offered to pick their kids up to let the couple figure out their issue, if Adrian wanted him to. It's unclear if anything came of this. However, Danny did return to the Mesa Street residence to return some clothes to his children. Although Louise and Adrian's vehicles were both parked outside the residence, neither of them answered. In fact, the house was strangely quiet and still. Danny left the bag of clothes on the family's door handle, but before leaving, he called Adrian. Still no answer, he left another voicemail. Just before Danny left the residence, Luis called him. He told him that, quote, everything was okay. And even though Danny still wasn't fully convinced of that, he left anyway. And he was captured on surveillance at a nearby Circle K at 7:53 p.m. At approximately 8:15 p.m., a delivery driver arrived at the La Mesa Street residence to deliver a package. He knocked at the door several times, but was left with no answer. The driver had to continue his shift and decided to leave the residence. But as he drove out of the neighborhood, there was a loud bang that sounded like a gunshot coming from the area he had just left. The driver dialed 911 and reported the gunshots before leaving the neighborhood. Neighbors of the couple, Gabriel Resendez and Rocio Lopez, were in their backyard when they heard the gunshots, followed by yells for help coming from Luis's backyard. Lopez immediately dialed 911 as Resendez leaped over the wall that divided the neighbors in an attempt to see what was going on and provide possible aid. Once Gabriel landed in the backyard, he was met with a man standing there with a gun in his hand. The man looked at Gabriel, then looked back down at the gun, before just casually walking back into the home. Gabriel later identified that man in court as Preston Strong. He also testified to seeing a trail of blood leading to where Luis laid in the backyard with his hands tied behind his back, suffering from his gunshot wounds. 2 years following Strong's indictment for Dr. Gill's murder, he was also indicted for the murders of 29-year-old Adrian, 35-year-old Luis, 13-year-old Andreas, 12-year-old Enrique, 9-year-old Inez, and 6-year-old Danny III. It was revealed that Strong stayed in the La Mesa home and murdered the victims over the span of 6 hours. In both murder cases, he beat and bound the victims before strangling them or shooting them to death. Strong's sole motive for the murders was money. 9 years after the heinous crime, on May 5th, 2017, Preston Strong was found guilty on all 6 counts of murder. And a total of 12 years after the murders, Preston Elton Strong was sentenced to death in the state of Arizona. Although he has tried to appeal both convictions, accusing the police of criminal misconduct, the Arizona Supreme Court continues to uphold Strong's death sentence for the murders he committed in 2005. As of today, Preston Strong is now 60 years old and sits on death row in the Arizona Department of Corrections, Rehabilitation, and Reentry in Phoenix, Arizona. He is still awaiting his execution date, as the state of Arizona has yet to issue a warrant of execution, which is the document signed by the judge authorizing the state to carry out an execution, including the day, time, and method in which the prisoner sentenced to death will be executed. And he will remain there until that day comes. Before we close out our case, I would like to take a moment to remember all of our victims, both from the La Mesa Street murders and Dr. Gill's murder. Adrian and her 4 children were very active in their community, especially in sports, before and at the time of their untimely deaths. Adrian, as well as her sons Andreas and Enrique, were all a part of the Yuma Boxing Association. Andreas and Enrique were actually a part of the Youth Boxing Association. And the boys were also members of the Yuma Babe Ruth Youth Baseball Program. Andreas and Enrique had just finished 7th and 6th grade, respectively, at the time of their passing. They are remembered by their community as extremely sweet boys with huge potential. Adrian's younger children, Inez and Danny III, were both active in their community sports programs as well. Inez and her little brother Danny were both a part of YYFTL, the Yuma Youth Fast Pitch and T-Ball League. The siblings had just completed 3rd grade and kindergarten, respectively, at the time of their deaths. The entire family was known to be very social and kind, not only to one another, but to everyone that knew them. Luis Rios, who was 35 years old at the time of his passing, had 2 daughters with his previous wife, Kayla and Amanda, who have since gone on to have children of their own. They remind their children on Luis's birthday and every anniversary of his passing that their grandpa Luis was a, quote, hard-working, very sweet, teddy bear dad. Those were common words attached to Luis's legacy. He was extremely hardworking, but always super sweet and kind, and just the perfect example of a family man according to all those that knew and loved him. Satinder Gill, who was 62 years old at the time of his passing, is survived by his 2 children, his daughter Jetsna Milburn and his son Sujoy Gill. He also leaves behind 1 brother, 2 sisters, and 1 granddaughter. There wasn't much I could find regarding Dr. Gill and his effect on his community, but I can only assume that a man who spent most of his life saving the lives of others was an honorable and well-respected man. As the grandchild of immigrants, I can say that it takes real courage to leave home to provide a better life for not only yourself, but your family. And I believe that this is the type of man Dr. Gill was, a courageous, well-respected, and loved man by many. All of our victims were and still are important to many people who are still here on this earth. And I'm sure it was a great privilege to have known them and been given the opportunity to connect with each and every single one of them. There are no resources for today's case, but I would like to take this little segment to say if you know something or have ever witnessed something regarding a criminal case, please, please, please speak up. In too many cases, there are people close to the criminals who have turned the other cheek or decided not to speak up when they noticed something was off about that person. I can't help but think that without Preston Strong's girlfriend at the time giving her tip to police, Dr. Gill and even the Mesa Street victims would have probably never gotten their justice. It takes courage to do the right thing, especially when you aren't sure if speaking up will put you in danger or not, but I do commend her and encourage all my listeners to always do the right thing. So now that we're finished with our case, we're at the part of the episode where we do our police/detective rating and the judge/jury rating. So we'll kick off our ratings with the police/detectives in both cases. I honestly feel like the police work in this case is pretty hard to judge because part of me wants to scream like, oh my gosh, open your eyes. Do not be this naive to these officers, because in regards to Preston the first time around, because Occam's razor, right? Like the simplest explanation is often the correct one. Preston Strong at the end of the day was a leech. And he fought his quote unquote best friend. I'm going to say that lightly because obviously a best friend would not do to Luis what Preston did to him. Like, as he's fighting Luis for his hard-earned money, and when he gets told no, a month later, he brutally murders his entire family. That's insane. Not only that, but Strong's DNA and fingerprints were everywhere. I don't know about you guys, but I don't go in people's house and just touch everything. Like, I get it. They were friends. Like, sure, you'd find my fingerprints on my best friend's toilet seat or like, I don't know, her bed. I don't know, her perfume. I don't know, like her clothes. I don't know. Like, I would not be touching her garbage bags. What the hell? I would not be touching her garbage bags. Her garbage bags, electric wires, like the nightstand. What the hell are you touching the nightstand for? I don't know. I just said the headboard, so I guess that's kind of weird. But like, I don't, like, my fingerprints wouldn't just be all over people's houses. Sit your ass in one spot and enjoy your company. You don't even pay bills here. You don't even pay for anything, really. So like, why would his fingerprints need to be everywhere? But why is his DNA on the steering wheel of a car that you don't pay bills for? Nobody's touching a steering wheel of a car that they don't pay bills for. So that makes no sense. But I get it. The officers couldn't assume. But then that's where the other half of me comes in, because the other half of me really does believe that the investigators didn't want to falsely accuse the wrong man. Like, wrongful convictions are like one of the worst parts of the judicial system, let me tell you. And I'd like to think that most detectives go into this job wanting to do honest work and being as honorable as possible. So if the neighbors say they saw a light-skinned Hispanic man, why would they go arrest a black man? And as a black woman, I really appreciate that, because if we address the elephant in the room, accusing black people of crimes that they didn't do is honestly the easiest thing for a lot of these detectives to do. And don't get mad at me. Don't do it. Don't get mad at me. Because if you just look at the decades of wrongful convictions, Black people make up less than 14% of the U.S. population, but somehow we account for 53% of the people exonerated for crimes they did not commit. Clock that. Black people are 7.5 times more likely to be wrongfully convicted of murder. And this all heavily ties back to the systemic issues, because 71 to 79% of all wrongful convictions are due to official misconduct by law enforcement. And don't argue with me, argue with NPR.org and deathpenaltyinfo.org. Thank you. But anyway, I think I will give the investigators and police a solid C plus in general, I think. Big sister general. I would have to just give them a C plus, because at the end of their day, the job was to look at the facts and work with what they knew. I'm really not sure when they found out the information about Luis's neighbors, Gabriel and Rocio, because that information was pretty damning. Gabriel literally testified to being in the backyard where Luis laid dying and seeing Preston with the gun in his hand and then walking back into the house where the murders were committed. I don't know where that information just kind of sprung out of nowhere, but like, hello, that would have been enough to put him away day one. And I think if they did a little bit more, or maybe, dare I say, better investigating, I don't know, it's not my job to judge, but I think that they could have had a whole lot more evidence sooner to arrest and convict Preston. And that possibly would have saved Dr. Gill's life, because his murder only happened just 2 years later. But I will say the detectives in Dr. Gill's case did work pretty fast. But a majority of their job was already done because Preston was already in custody for a separate crime. So I can't give you guys too many coins, too many tens, because you didn't really have to do much. That man was already in custody. All you had to do was just start stacking charges on him and presenting people with evidence. Like that was it. So yeah, both teams, you get a C plus. Sorry. Now, for the judge and the jury in this case, you're getting a phenomenal A++. Dare I say even an S tier rating. I think sentencing Preston for natural life in prison for Dr. Gill's murder was extremely fair, and adding those extra 25 and a half years, I'm not mad at it. But to take 6 lives? Yeah, we need that, because he was sentenced to death. Like, that was perfect. I think being sentenced to death for each life that you took 9 years ago is more than fair. I understand there's a lot of controversy regarding the death penalty, because a lot of people feel like prison is for reform. We're supposed to be teaching people. And also, if you do commit a crime, you should be here to have to serve it. Death is kind of an easy way out. But I think what I'm pretty sure everybody on this earth fears more than anything is death. So if that man gets to sit there and just wallow in the fact that he's going to die soon, hopefully that strikes fear in his heart. I don't know. He's a pretty psychotic nut job, but hopefully the sliver of a heart that he has is feeling some sort of fear. Because the families of the Mesa Street victims had to wait 9 years just to hear that Preston was going to be convicted of that crime. And then a total of 12 years just to hear that real justice was going to be given to him. So the only thing I wish was different was that Preston did have an execution date already set, but at the same time, I think it's fair for him to sit on death row waiting and just wondering when he will be put to death, because I think that's torture. Me personally, that would be torture to me. And I think that's the exact same torture that the family of Adrian, Luis, Andreas, Enrique, Inez, and Danny all had to endure over the past decade, over a decade. And the pain and devastation doesn't even just stop there, because there's nothing anyone could ever do to bring back their family members. But I do think that Preston Strong got exactly what he deserved. And at the end of the day, the people of Yuma can rest assured that the sun will always come out once again. My sources for this week's case have been ArizonaDailyIndependent.com, CBSNews.com, CBS12.com, Corrections.az.gov, CourierJournal.com, DeathPenaltyInfo.org, FindAGrave.com, NPR.org, People.com, SupremeCourt.gov, and Wikipedia.org. Okay, guys, that is the end of today's episode. Thank you all so much for tuning in this week. I'm so sorry again that I've been gone for so long, but I promise I will be here every single Wednesday. Do not forget to support the show on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Instagram, TikTok. I got everything. If you want me, just look for me, and all my show links are going to be in the bio if you need anything at all. But that's it. Thank you guys so much for listening to this week's episode. Thank you for all your support. Remember to always be kind to one another and take care of each other. And I hope to see you all next week as we put more Mer in Murder. Bye.